Welcome to Built Different. I'm Erin Sykes, business analyst, real estate professional, and someone who's endlessly curious about the systems that shape how we live, grow, and spend. Each week, I dive into the markets, mindsets, and moments that define our lives, from real estate to wealth, psychology, relationships, and everything in between. Because what we build is not just financial, it's human.
Hi, I'm Lou Belisario, and I'm built different because I survived 20 years of selling Brooklyn real estate.
Hi, I'm Erin Sykes, and welcome back to Built Different. Today, we have Lou Belisario, the founder of Revived Residential, a Brooklyn-based brokerage firm focused on thoughtful development, neighborhood expertise, and long-term value creation. With deep roots in New York City real estate, Lou has witnessed firsthand the evolution of Brooklyn from overlooked to global brand. Through Revived Residential, he works closely with agents, developers, and buyers navigating one of the most competitive and constantly shifting markets in the country. Welcome, Lou.
Thanks for having me, Erin. I appreciate it.
Of course, you are our first non-Florida-based guest.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I'm so happy to have some New York City blood down here.
Absolutely. Listen, that's what I'm here for.
Absolutely. So now you are kind of like the king of Brooklyn. Born and raised, right?
Born and raised. Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to know firsthand, how have you watched New York City and Brooklyn specifically evolve over the years? What feels different between 10, 15 years ago and today?
Well, I'll tell you, I could use an example just in my memory. I had an office in Fort Greene, which is a neighborhood that was always coined as like one of the first gentrified neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And when I used to walk outside, this is going back, 2010 to 2013, let's say, I'd walk outside and I look up and there was an iconic building there called the Williamsburg Savings Bank Clock Tower. Right? And they turned it to condos, and it was like the biggest condo project at the time, and all this stuff. And now if I did the same thing and I walked out of that office, Brooklyn has its own skyline, which is like not an exaggeration whatsoever. It's got an insane skyline now. So I'm never going to say it competes with Manhattan's skyline, but in New York City, it's definitely the second biggest skyline there is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the effect of Manhattan in a lot of ways, where it made Brooklyn react to Manhattan in a way, because Manhattan became so overinflated and so crazy to touch Manhattan, that where else are you going to go if you want to stay within the boroughs and you want to be within, a few train stops to work. So, watching the evolution of Brooklyn has been nuts. We have an NBA team. We never had an NBA team before. That was crazy. So when the Brooklyn Nets came, that was a big transformation. And, all eyes have been on Brooklyn for at least the last, I got to say, 15, 16 years. It's really been hyper-focused, but probably going back 25, 30 years where a lot of people really put their focus on Brooklyn.
Absolutely. And I feel like the evolution has been young professional. They want to be, 20 years old in the West Village or wherever. Then they get married, have kids, they've got strollers and they need a car and all that type of stuff. 35 years old, they want to move to Brooklyn.
Sure.
And now there's so many different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. You can start at the bridge and go well deep into the borough. And it really helps those young families, people that want to be accessible to Long Island, or maybe that they're working from home. They get a little bit more space. They want a townhouse, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah. Brooklyn is like the townhouse capital of America, potentially, I think. And that's what a lot of it are those townhouses in the neighborhoods that everybody knows about, obviously, the Park Slopes of the world, the Carroll Gardens, the Borum Hills. But to be honest with you, now, those are untouchable neighborhoods in my mind, right? So for me as a born and raised Brooklynite, I would have never thought in my entire life that you'd spend upwards of $10 million to live in a townhouse in Brooklyn, but it's happening regularly. Every single week there's a new record being broken, I feel like, in a high-end townhouse market. And now what's really happening is those buyers, that same migration that happened from Manhattan to Brooklyn into those markets, now those markets in Brooklyn are having a further migration deeper into Brooklyn, further away from the trains and the hustle and bustle of brownstone Brooklyn, and hitting markets that, again, I could say the same thing. I never thought in a million years that a house in Flatbush would sell for $2 million, but they are. Or a house in Midwood is selling for $3 or $4 million, and so on and so forth. And, I think that being that New York City is a global epicenter, really, if you want to be here, you're going to figure out a way to live here, and you're going to figure out a way that it fits within your budget. So if that means you have to venture further out, you're willing to do it to stay within the limits.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that maybe the general population doesn't understand, because people here in New York City, a lot of times they think of Manhattan. The average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment now in Manhattan's over $5,300.
Yep, it's crazy.
It's become absolutely untouchable. I mean, you're getting 3 or 4 kids like stuffed together in one bedroom apartment in order to live in the neighborhood that they initially thought they wanted. Then they're getting smart and going to places like Brooklyn. But in terms of being an agent or owning a brokerage like yourself in Brooklyn or in, Manhattan, you really need to specialize. And I think something that I can't touch Brooklyn personally. I don't know anything about Brooklyn, no Manhattan like the back of my hand, but I think that Revived is really special in that you deep dive into all of those neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And that's something that, for me, I'm actually a 3rd-generation real estate broker in Brooklyn. So for me, it's special to do that. And it's special to carry that on. And maybe my children will make it the 4th generation of Brooklyn real estate brokers. But you definitely hit the nail on the head. We really, really focus on all of Brooklyn. And I think that, over the years, boutique brokerage, like we both are, really dominated Brooklyn and Manhattan forever. And then it went away, and then the big box brokerages came in, and now it's kind of making a comeback. And I do think the hand-holding and the, being a neighborhood specialist is very, very important, but being a borough specialist is even more important. So, at Revive, we have around 35 agents. A lot of them, I'd say 30 out of 35. Don't quote me on that, but about that percentage, like born and raised in different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And that was part of what we built, was to say, hey, listen, if we're able to bring in different people from different parts of Brooklyn, then why shouldn't we be the go-to Brooklyn broker if I have somebody from Canarsie or somebody from Carroll Gardens or somebody from Bay Ridge or Marine Park? Having those neighborhood experts who grew up in the neighborhoods, who went to the schools, who eat at the restaurants, who could walk down the block and say hello to 25 people. To me, that's the most important part of owning a boutique brokerage, is having the manpower and the ability and the true knowledge, to really execute exactly what we're looking to do.
Yeah. And I think that when you're with one of the big box brokerages, a lot of times those brokerages are assigning territories to people. They're figuring, where are we soft? Where don't we have coverage? Where don't people want to go to? And they put their junior brokers on those, X, Y, and Z points. Whereas when you have something like Revived, or when you have a boutique brokerage, then you're starting with expertise and you're leading with that versus, where do we have a stopgap?
Absolutely. 100%.
So now, what do you think of Brooklyn today? Has it plateaued? Have we seen, the peak for a while, or is it going to continue to go up?
I don't think Brooklyn's plateaued. Honestly, I think Brooklyn has a lot more room for value growth in a lot of these markets. Some areas you may see maybe a slight dip in the market, but I just don't see it happening in the major markets. And it's the same story, I think, in a lot of the country. Florida may be a little bit different, but a lot of the other big metropolises in the country still have a very, very limited inventory of homes for sale. And that's no different in Brooklyn. If you own a townhouse in Brooklyn and you're at a rate that's 4%, 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% even, you're not selling that townhouse. So the competition for these townhouses is astronomical. And if you really, really think about it, what's a 4-bedroom like in Manhattan selling for, in Chelsea? Like, what is that selling for? $20 million, right? So you could either go ahead, and if you're a growing family in New York City, you could, if you have $20 million, God bless you. But your option is Manhattan if you're going to spend that. If you don't, though, and say you have $5 million or $6 million or $10 million, $12 million, Brooklyn becomes an option because you're going to get a lot more space, right? So say the average townhouse in a major market, say like a Park Slope or a Carroll Gardens, high end is selling for like $2,000 a square foot, maybe $2,200, maybe $1,800, but say about $2,000 a square foot. If you take that same square footage and put that in Manhattan, right? You put that on the Upper West Side, or you put that in the Village somewhere. What is that trading at? It's probably trading at double, triple, quadruple of that price. So I think Brooklyn still has a lot of room for growth. I was I forgot which, maybe the Wall Street Journal years and years ago called me up, and I gave them a quote on like on when Brooklyn was changing then. And I said, people want to have like in their mind, like the Cosby Show life. Right, where it's like you come home and you have this big grand brownstone and you have 4 levels of living space. What I'm noticing a lot too is people are getting away from the multifamily stuff in Brooklyn, right? So that's a massive thing that's happening. The biggest thing in in Brooklyn right now is huge developers, luxury developers buying multifamily townhouses and converting them to single family mansions. And I think that's because the Manhattan buyer, quote unquote, that would spend the same 10 million for a 3-bedroom in a building with 100 units in it could take that 10 million, bring it to Brooklyn, and have one 5,000 square foot townhouse, multiple levels for themselves. And you can kind of pick and choose what you want. The creativity I'm seeing in these townhouses these days is out of control. Obviously, from movie theaters to wine cellars to gyms and all types of stuff within your own home. You could create it for the same price that you'd spend in Manhattan for a condo or a co-op. So, so to answer your question, Brooklyn has a lot more room to grow. I do think it's specific neighborhoods that you're going to see that in, but I still think Brooklyn's a phenomenal investment.
What are your favorite neighborhoods and where do you see growth? And do they have to align? I mean, maybe
No.
the highest growth area are the ones deeper into Brooklyn, maybe places that I have personally never been,
Sure.
but tell me about them.
Yes, I mean, I'm partial, so I'm going to say where I grew up, which is Marine Park. So Marine Park is in South Brooklyn. So if you look at Brooklyn like a circle, the southern part of Brooklyn does not have trains. Right. So that's why that part of Brooklyn has grown a lot slower than the northern part of Brooklyn. So you have to take a bus to a train. It's a 2-fare zone in that part of Brooklyn. But Marine Park has the largest green space in Brooklyn. It has a nature preserve, has a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of old historic homes there that have a lot of stories behind them as well. Mainly single families, blue collar for the most part, through the years. I have one office in that neighborhood. I'm still there every single day. My mother still lives in the neighborhood. And then I love a neighborhood like Carroll Gardens. I'm a big Carroll Gardens guy. I love the food in Carroll Gardens. I love the architecture of the brownstones and the streets in Carroll Gardens. It's close enough to the city, and there's a lot there. To me, what it is? I'm like a Brooklyn purist, right?
Mhm.
So for me, when I grew up in Brooklyn, it was a different Brooklyn. It was completely different than what it is now. So if I could still get like a taste of the old Brooklyn, when I'm out there doing what I do every day, and mixing it with the new Brooklyn, I like that. And I think Carroll Gardens, historically, like an Italian neighborhood, you still have a lot of the old guard of Carroll Gardens still living there. My grandparents are from down that way. My grandparents met in a tenement building on St. Mark's Place in like 4th Avenue, which is kind of like Borum Hill also. But my grandfather was a longshoreman. That's what people did back then. So the old Brooklyn I still am very, very partial to it. The new Brooklyn is different. You know what I mean? It's different. And for a lot of the Brooklynites, I mean, you guys got plenty of Brooklynites down this way. So, a lot of them left and went to Florida or Staten Island or Jersey or whatever it may be. But the memories of Brooklyn will always remain with those people because it was a very, very special place to call home and grow up for generations of Brooklynites. And it will be for the next generations of Brooklynites. It'll just be different than what we experienced.
For sure. And in terms of those older generations, was it very maritime driven? Because Brooklyn has a lot of coastline.
Yeah.
And I think that people forget about that. They think of it more as not landlocked, but they
Mhm.
think of the areas where they pass through, maybe on the way to JFK, and they forget a lot about the coastal areas. Now, you're very tech driven in terms of the industries that are there. So
Right.
what type of jobs are available in Brooklyn?
I mean, something I always want to point out, Brooklyn is a part of Long Island, technically, right? So if we think about that, right, Long Island is surrounded by water. So to your point, Brooklyn's surrounded by water. Where I grew up, where I live right now, I live on the Atlantic Ocean. I technically live in Queens right now, but I live in the Rockaways in Bell Harbor, which is a barrier island off of Brooklyn. And I grew up across the street from where it used to be a mill back in the day. So I was always surrounded by water. Brooklyn historically is blue collar, right? So historically, like for me, I'll use myself as an example. When I was growing up, everybody became a firefighter, a cop, a teacher, or a nurse. Those are the 4 biggest careers that you chose when I grew up. I still have most of my friends are that. My brother's a union carpenter. My sister was a teacher. She's now in real estate. A lot of my friends are in the FDNY or NYPD or sanitation. That's kind of what you did. Then you have the other half that was like, I'm going to go work on Wall Street, right? So they became stockbrokers and things of that nature. So the job opportunities in Brooklyn for New York City in general, I think New York offers a great opportunity for union work, for anybody. And I think a lot of people have gotten away from that. And I think that we, not only as people in New York City, but in general in this country, need to kind of get back to that blue collar way of living. I think we need a lot more plumbers and carpenters and electricians than we need poets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think it's more AI proof. And
Yes.
you go back to Mike Rowe and Dirty Jobs, and those are the people that are, first of all, coming out of apprenticeships, making easily 6 figures
Easily.
without debt.
Mhm.
And they're getting jobs. They can run their own business or they can work for bigger corporations versus a lot of people are going to college these days, graduating with $300,000 of debt. And then there's no job for, certain majors.
Yep.
And even majors that you thought were going to be really strong, AI or coding, now those things have changed so dramatically and shifted so fast that the computers are just taking over the jobs that people were trained to do
Exactly.
on the computers.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
I think that what I've seen with, the big tech communities through Manhattan and, they have the big campuses now, they're going from what used to be, downtown buildings that take over, like Google building. Now they moved up to Long Island City, they moved out to Brooklyn, and it's attracting a really, really dynamic young crowd.
Oh, totally. I mean, Red Hook has a gigantic Amazon warehouse there, and you're seeing a lot of that. But I'll tell you what I do see a lot of with the young crowd. We do a lot of rentals, right? So a ton of rentals. We probably did 350 rentals last year, right? So parents are mainly co-signing for their kids. And I'm not saying their kids like they're 19-year-old kids. I'm talking about like their 34-year-old children are being co-signed for, because a lot of people come to New York City with a dream, which is, again, we are the city of big dreams. It's all about that. But eventually, I think that society and people need to just not give up on your dream, but face reality a little bit also. And there's a time you have to now just become an adult and live an adult lifestyle. I can't tell you how many people are just straight up co-signed by their parents in different states and, who come from money and things of that nature. And they probably will be like that for a long time. And to me, that's an unfortunate way of looking at it, because at the same time, maybe you're sold a dream that isn't reality, right? Or, a lifestyle that's just not real life, and I think New York City needs infrastructure. Right, infrastructure is collapsing around us in New York. I think a lot of it, it falls on obviously on the government, people in leadership, and things like that. But we also need people to go out there and do the job. And I think a lot of people could just do that if they just chose to. Just go get a union job. Like, why not? There's no shame in any of this. You know what I mean? I remember when I went to college, nobody had really pushed me to that. It was more like, oh, you have to go and work in an office building or whatever it may be. I took my firefighter's test as a backup to real estate. I got my real estate license when I was 20. I'll be 40 on Monday, right? So 20 years of this. But as a backup, because I was like, real estate's a crazy game, right? I know I've been in generational, parts of this business. So I passed my firefighter's test. They called me to be a firefighter, and I was like, I'll stick to real estate. I like it, But I think everybody, and when we're raising children today, like even when I'm raising my own children, there's no shame in any of this. And I think people have to really understand that part of life, where there's a place for everybody. Like you said, you're not going into massive debt and student loans and starting out behind the eight ball when you're gone, when you get into the workforce. Like, go out, you make $85,000 to start out as a cop or a firefighter, and then you could grow to $280,000, $300,000 in 10, 15 years, retire by the time you're 40. Right? I think about that all the time. Like, I could be retired by now.
It's not
amazing.
amazing.
My 20th year.
I feel like I'm just getting started, but hypothetically, you could be moving on to a full second career.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Now, does Brooklyn have the 80X rule for rentals that Manhattan does? So in Manhattan, you've got to make 80X the monthly
40,
rent.
40.
It's 40 in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
okay. So it's still quite a high bar, but
Absolutely.
At least it's a little bit more obtainable than 80, because there's almost nobody in their 20s to 30 years old that can.
That's why you need the co-signer. Even the 40 is like that, and it's, for me, the rentals, and Joe Cruz, who's my founding partner at Revived, Joe is like a rental machine.
God bless him.
He's a machine, 100%. I'll be honest with you, I've done one rental in my entire life, and it was in Dumbo, and it was like $8,000. So I was like, I'll do it, no problem. But Joe is out there doing rentals like crazy, and the rental laws in New York City are absolutely insane. So Manhattan doesn't get it as much unless you're in like upper Manhattan. Like if you're in Inwood or Washington Heights or something like that, you'll fall into the same kind of place as us in Brooklyn, where there's a lot of programs. Right? New York City gives out a lot of programs. And now it's different than it ever was before. A program in Brooklyn is $2,700 for a one-bedroom, and the city pays for you to do that. Right? If you qualify for this program, a 2-bedroom can go up to, I want to say it was like $3,750, 4 bedrooms over $4,000 for Section 8. And now this is something that we run into regularly, and it's all good. Like, no problem. We actually like this. We're like, okay, no problem. The city's going to pay us.
Because you're getting that rent.
Guaranteed. So for landlords, it's guaranteed. It used to have a very, it was looked down upon for a long time. But recently, the city's really spurred this up, and it's been given out to everybody who qualifies for it. It used to be given out to people who are like recovering addicts and, shelters and things things like that, but it's not the case anymore. So you're seeing a lot more landlords do that. But what would help out New York City right now, New York City has 80,000 vacant apartments, right? So the biggest thing that people talk about in New York is affordable housing, right? In 2019, when the rent laws changed, New York City shot themselves in the foot with this, right? It's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but it's just real life, right? So there's 80,000 vacant units right now in New York City that nobody's living in, that landlords are not incentivized to go in and renovate or update whatsoever because the city has capped them, right? So they become rent stabilized or rent controlled apartments where the city says, okay, you were getting $800 a month for that apartment. Well, you can only raise it now to $816. So what's the incentive for the landlord to go in and renovate that apartment for $816 when the landlord's going to spend $50,000, $100,000 renovating these apartments? If New York City would just change a little bit and become a little bit more landlord friendly, I think that way more people would have homes in New York City, and you wouldn't have the amount of people living on the streets in New York City. That's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
But it's a good one.
It's like they're controlling their quantity of units available
Correct.
artificially.
100%. That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the problem becomes now too is like, where are you developing? Where are you adding more affordable housing? Like New York City's so developed already, right? There's outskirt parts of Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx where you could certainly build, but who's living there? And how are you getting to work every day? And what kind of industry is in the neighborhood? And, is the neighborhood safe? Is it not safe? Is it too far away? There's so many factors at play, but New York City could for sure right now with just like that, flip a switch, incentivize landlords, right, to renovate these apartments. And you now have 80,000 brand new apartments in New York City.
Interesting. Now, are you seeing families, or are you seeing investors? Are you seeing second home buyers? Who is actually able to afford Brooklyn right now?
I think it's mainly families that are affording these massive numbers, right? But the other problem with Brooklyn is this, and I want to say it's a personal problem for me, but it kind of is. Over the last, say, 10 years, the developers in New York City have been incentivized to build 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in New York City, right? So what happens after a while, right? Natural progression happens. You're living in a 1 bedroom. You meet somebody, right? You get engaged. You get married. You have children. Now it's like, okay, where are we going to live, babe? Oh, well, I don't have $5 million to live in the same neighborhood we're renting for $5,000 in. So I'm going to move to Long Island or Westchester or Pennsylvania or New Jersey or anywhere else in the world. So what's happening to a lot of places in Brooklyn is a sense of community is what we're losing because there's so much turnover in a lot of these neighborhoods. And I think outside of that, it's mainly families, right? So if it was Park Slope or Windsor Terrace or Carroll Gardens or Prospect Heights, even Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, if you're buying a townhouse, you're mainly a family starting out, or a family who's saying, okay, we don't have enough space in Manhattan, we're going to come to Brooklyn. So I'd say the big money that's being spent in Brooklyn is for sure by end user families. I think you do have a lot of international money that gets spent in Brooklyn. It just depends on the building type that they're going to spend it in. So I don't think you're going to get many investors from Hong Kong or, wherever that are going to spend it on 1 family townhouses. It may get spent on 2, 3, 4, and 5 family townhouses. That's where I see a lot of investors in is the 3, 4s, and 5s, because the 3, 4s, and 5s have now become the best asset class in Brooklyn because the 6 families and above fall into the rental laws of 2019.
Interesting.
Right? So now you're getting a lot more. It used to be years ago, if you had a 6 family and you could deliver it vacant, everybody and their mother was all over that building. Like, yep, I'll give you whatever you want for, because that was the best asset class to have, because that was not, you could destabilize it. You could do condos. You could have, a real crazy income generating building. Can't have it anymore. So what I do now, too, just on a personal level, me and my partners, we focus on 3 family buildings. Like we bought like 3 in the last 2 months, just because those are the best investments, in my opinion, in Brooklyn, because the city of New York does not have their hands in it, ... yet.
Yeah, so they are not rent controlled at that scale.
Correct.
Only
Yep.
6 and above.
Correct. 5 and below, not rent controlled, not rent stabilized.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, so when we went through the election in New York with Mandami, we had a lot of chatter down here in Florida that there was going to be some type of mass exodus down to Florida as a result. We never saw that. And I never thought that we were going to see that, because I think the problem with the microcosm down here is that sometimes Floridians forget the attributes of the world outside, because we are very, very locally proud, right?
Sure.
Now, the thing is with the election, it didn't take into account, or that chatter about moving to Florida did not take into account that people have jobs. People can't just up and leave their job. Not everybody is independently wealthy. People have kids in schools. They don't want to disrupt them during the middle of the school year. So the long short is we didn't see this mass migration post Mamdani election in New York. However, I would imagine that you saw some type of bump outside of Manhattan into Brooklyn, or, into Long Island, or into northern New Jersey.
Sure.
Because then you can still continue to live your same lifestyle. And of course, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, it's all part of that same, 5 boroughs. However, I do feel like maybe you're not as subject of scrutiny in Brooklyn as, perhaps Midtown Manhattan is.
Sure. I mean, here's what I think with the whole Mamdani thing. So you remember I put that Instagram video up? You saw that Instagram video?
Yes.
That was mainly towards real estate brokers who were like, call me if you want to leave.
I hated
that.
I
hated it too. Like, that's so cheesy. Give me a break. I'm not one of those people who will ever be like New York or nowhere. Like, because there's plenty of places you can go. If it makes you happy, go. But the reality of the situation is, just like you said, you're tied to your jobs, you're tied to your kids' schools, you're tied to your lifestyle, right? Like, as much as I love South Florida, like, my wife would move here tomorrow, right? But I wouldn't, and it's not because I don't love it down here, but I like it in doses. I like having seasons up north, and I think a lot of New Yorkers do. And I like people to say, all right, I'm going to go to the top 5 restaurant in the world. I could go and I could have a 20-minute drive and I'm there. Those are things I like about New York City. There's plenty of things that I don't like about New York City, but there's plenty of things I don't like about a lot of places. And that's where I'm born and raised. And to me, I'm not one who's going to just flee and run from Mamdani. Like, Mamdani, all right, if we survive, build de Blasio. This is what I always say, right? Like, we got through de Blasio. De Blasio had the same thoughts, the same ideas as Mamdani has. And the reality of the situation is, if you know anything about any type of government, this man can't do the things he's saying he's going to do, right? So a lot of people got the wool pulled over their eyes. There's not going to be rent freeze on anything. And if there is a rent freeze on anything, guess what it's on? 6 family and above. So if you live in a 2-family, a 3-family, a 4-family, 5-family, he can't do anything. There's not going to be free buses. Will there be grocery stores that are, like socialized grocery stores? Maybe there will be. Let's see what happens. I'm not somebody who could ever live in a negative mindset about things, right? I'm very much a realist about everything, but I also like to see the positive side of things if I can. So when Mamdani got elected, or let's say the time up to it, the market was dead for us. Like, in Brooklyn, I would say from like August to, when's the election day? November 15th or November, something like that, right? That 3-month period was slow. We had townhouses that were sitting on the market with no offers, no action, people just coming, looking. Strategically, what we did was we pulled them off the market right before the election. We were like, you know what? Like, this is like 3 or 4 big townhouses we had. And then we said, you know what? Let's just relaunch in the new year. Right, like, elections happening, let everybody cool down from that. In New York City, you're either going to be ecstatic that this happened, or you're going to hate every second of it. There's no middle ground in New York City when it comes to politics. You're either left or you're right, and that's what it is in a lot of situations, right? So we put it back on the market in January. A lot of these townhouses, offers immediately. Bidding wars, back again. That's what I'm seeing. So I think people just needed to cool down from that. The mass migration part of it, even like Jersey, I don't do that much Staten Island, but Staten Island would know better than anybody, right? Because most of the people moving to Jersey are originally in Staten Island, right? So Staten Island is always like the hopping pad. And no offense to my Staten Islanders, I love you guys, but reality is you go from Brooklyn, then you go to Staten Island, then you go to Jersey. So I don't know if that has changed that much. I really don't think so. I think it's been the same consistent thing. Like, if your plan was, I'm going to go to Jersey, you were going to Jersey, whether it was Mamdani or whoever else was running. It doesn't make a difference, or Cuomo.
It just gave you somebody to blame.
That's it. It's really what it came down to.
Yeah. Now, has the growth of Brooklyn shifted from, developing the smaller townhouses or the 2, 4, 5 sub-6s that you're talking about? Are we not building those at all anymore? Are we only building towers?
So I see conversions a lot, right? So I'll see a lot of townhouse conversions. I'm actually looking to do one myself if I could find one. I'm seeing that a lot in neighborhoods like Clinton Hill, a lot in Prospect Heights. Carroll Gardens is massive for this right now. We just did 2 deals where a guy paid over $4 million for a townhouse to convert to condos, because the condo market is figure 1,800 to 2,000 a square foot. So if you could pick up a brownstone for 3 to 4, right? At whatever, 800 a square foot, right? Figure your cost to build and convert is probably 350 a square foot, right? And then you have your soft costs that come out. You're going to make bank if you do that. And people are doing that more than anything else. So I'm not seeing a lot of ground up 4, 5, 6 families anymore, right? I see a lot of ground up monster developments, right? So it's like the 99 unit developments is what you're seeing a lot of now.
Mhm.
So we have one coming up that's 180 units, Park Slope. We have another one coming up, Coney Island, that's like 85 units. So we'll see that from like prolific developers that have these parcel land, or the one in Park Slope was a big old catering hall that they're converting into that. So you'll see conversions like that. But what you're seeing all day long are the 4-story brownstones that are being converted to 3 to 4 condos. So you'll sell out 1 floor each is basically what it is. And then there's a ton of that happening everywhere right now.
And in terms of amenities, you don't get so many amenities when you're doing one of those conversions, but you are with those larger condo projects. Is that driving your buyers?
I'd say that there's a large sect of buyers who don't care anything about that. They don't care about a pool or a gym or
They
a
go
movie
unused.
theater. This is years it's been happening, right? People would always sell like roof decks, like, oh, you got a roof deck with a view of Manhattan, but nobody goes to the roof, so it's just there, right? So it just becomes like a staircase the developer build, and it's like you guys can go there if you want, but nobody ever goes there, right? So I have one right now that I'm launching when I get back in Bed-Stuy. That's a 4-unit building. There's a roof deck. It's exclusive to the penthouse. But I guarantee you they go out there like 4 times a year, right? So that's what you'll get in the conversions. You're not going to get amenities whatsoever. But even in the big, huge towers, like people sell the amenities, but maybe the gym is used a lot. I can see that being something that's used often is the gym. That's like a value play because you could save your membership at Equinox or wherever else, or Orange Theory or one of those other gyms that you go to. Now you don't have to pay for that. You have it in your building. But like the movie theaters and all these over the top things, I really don't see people using them that much. They're kind of just there,
And regardless of whether you use them or not, you're carrying them every month in your condo fees. So it's almost like you've made such a case
Yeah.
for being in one of these brownstones in these sub-6 locations that I don't understand why anybody would go somewhere else.
You know what it is too? I think that people in general, like humans, are a community being, right? So if you're in a building with 100 other people in the building, how many of your neighbors do you actually know other than the people like on your floor? Maybe, right? And New York City is so hustle and bustle in and out. You're probably not even seeing people that often in those buildings, right? And all you're doing is just waving at somebody, but that's not enough to me. And I think the conversion parts, like imagine you bought 1 floor of a brownstone on one of the most beautiful blocks you could ever see, and you could walk outside and there's a little old lady next door who's been there for 70 years and she'll tell you about her grandkids. And across the street is Joe, and you know Joe because he takes his garbage out every single day at the same exact time, or he's sweeping in front of his house. That to me is a sense of community in Brooklyn. There's a block party in the summertime, right? Like things like that is why you move to Brooklyn. You don't move to Brooklyn, no offense to Manhattan, but you don't move to Brooklyn to live like you were living in Manhattan.
Right. Now, what separates your agents at Revived? What separates them from other agents, be them at a boutique brokerage or one of the larger brokerages? How did you recruit them?
Okay, gotcha. So for me, recruiting, I don't really spend that much energy in recruiting. And I don't want my next comment to sound cocky in any capacity, so please don't take it that way. But through my years, people have just kind of come. Right? They see what we're doing, whether it was at, my first, this is my 3rd brokerage. This is the one I own, but I've been 2 brokerages before that. At any of those brokerages, it's kind of like a natural attraction in a way. I'm a big networker, so I always like to go out and meet new agents and shake hands and, things of that nature. But what separates a Revived agent is we are straight up guerrilla warfare real estate brokers. And when I say that, I mean we are in the trenches battling, right? I think a lost art of real estate in Brooklyn and in New York City in general is the hunt for new business. And for me, I'm a big proprietor of the term, that it's, if you could teach a man to fish, he'll feed himself for the rest of his life. I want to teach our agents how to go out and hunt. I want to teach you how to call an expired listing or how to approach a for sale by owner or call a probate. Things like that to me is how you build your brand up and how you build your tough skin. I heard your last podcast about that. And it's very important to get to hear no very often, especially we're in the hardest sales environment that exists, in my opinion. And I think a lot of New York City agents rely solely on referrals. And to me, you're not going to get to where you want to be that way. Like you're going to eventually run out of referrals, if you're not farming it every single day of the week. To me, I always look at it like a pie, like it's a pizza pie, right? So if you have two slices that are dedicated to referrals, wonderful, 25% referrals, 35% is hunting, expire listings, for sale by owners, 20% should be social media marketing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at Revived, I want people who are willing to pick up the phone, make a phone call, hear the word no, not cry about it, hang up the phone, pick it up again, and keep on dialing until you get an appointment. And for me, I love listing houses. Like that's basically what I do. If I've sold 1,000 houses in my life, 950 of them have been my listings, and 50 are buyers. And it's only because I know you for the most part that I'm going to work with you on that end of it. So I want my agents to learn how to list. I want them to come into the office, which is so important to me. I know that COVID made everybody crazy with that, and I get that, but guess what? It's 6 years ago. It doesn't matter anymore. Get into the office, feed off of each other's energy. I want people to see other agents' success. If you see that, and you see that that person did it, you should believe in yourself that you can do it, right? What I always say is we all started in the same exact place. I went to I think it was 40 hours when I took my test, but a 40-hour course or a 75-hour course, then you went into the office and you kind of just figured it out. Like 20 years ago, there wasn't training like there is now. There wasn't anything online or a tech stack to go to and watch a video about anything. You just figured it out. And I think a lot of people today are just not willing to figure it out. They want you to give them the answer. And that becomes the hard, difficult part of recruiting also, is because you now have to invest your time and energy into this person. Is this person going to be loyal to you after you give them everything that you have, right? That's always my biggest concern, right? I've had this happen to me many times over the years, but as long as you give me a good amount of years, I'm not going to sit here and make you my enemy. You know what I mean? So if you invest in me, I invest in you is how I always look at it. And if you have to move on to greener pastures after X amount of time, I respect you very much. We'll remain friends in the business. There's plenty of agents like that in Brooklyn who started with me who have now grown to be their own broker owners or their own teams or their own massive agents. And, it's about getting back to like grassroots of real estate at Revived.
Yeah. And I think the biggest red flag when somebody's coming through the recruiting process is A, when they lead with what's my split, or B, when they lead with, how many referrals am I going to get, or what can you give
Correct.
me?
Yep.
And I think, unfortunately, this is just not one of those industries where you can rely on somebody else training you or kind of feeding you anything, even feeding you, like goodwill.
Yeah.
Because it is a very vicious industry and you've got to continually put yourself out there and you have to lead and you have to hear the no's because it's going to beat 80% of people down.
100%. You know what the nail in the coffin for that was Zillow Premier Agent. That was like the biggest thing that for me, for us in Brooklyn, at least, it was where you had brokerages who had $20,000 a month spends or $40,000 a month spends on Zillow leads, but then they were just feeding agents nonstop Zillow leads, and they would come to me. I'm like, oh, what's your Zillow account? Like, I don't have a Zillow account.
Yeah.
I don't want one. I had one for a very short period of time, and that was it. I don't need to do that. Like, we generate our own leads, and these leads are great leads. It's not going to just be, if you get 20 leads, 19 brutal, horrible leads. Like, if you get 10 leads from us, these are going to be qualified people who are ready to go buy a house today. There's a difference in that people just don't understand. Quality over quantity.
For sure. And I think the people, unfortunately, that are falling for the Zillow lead feeder, so the individuals that are searching on Zillow, and then they scroll down midway through the page and they see an agent's face and they assume that's the listing agent. They call that person. That person oftentimes does not even work in that locale.
100%.
I've run into it a lot lately. And I think it's because here in Florida, the market is kind of challenging in that people are buying leads 200 miles from where they live. And then they're A, not showing up to the showings. Maybe they're sending a different showing agent, or B, they're not showing up to inspection and kind of like the B, C tier parts of the transaction.
Yep.
And for better or worse, what's happening is their clients are catching on, unfortunately, late in the game, but then they're coming to us and being like, oh, I wish I had used you from the get-go. I understand now that you are the local expert.
Yep, 100%.
Now, where do you see the Brooklyn market, the overall New York City market moving in the next 5 years?
I see Brooklyn continuing to grow. I see New York City continuing to grow in general. I really don't think there's going to be a fall off the cliff for New York City in 5 years from now. I just don't see it. There's nothing that, to me, that points in that direction. I do not see a mass exodus at all. Until businesses start mass exiting Brooklyn or New York City in general, I just don't see people leaving. People don't leave, then New York City has a major problem, is that they can't house enough people in New York City at this point in time. So I just see, I'm not going to say exponential growth. I would say steady growth over 5 years. There'll be certain markets that will be affected by, different things out, that are out of our control. But for the most part, I just can't see it. The money is not leaving New York City anytime soon. Like, where are they going? They're going to go to Texas? All right, go to Texas. But I guarantee you're going to come back to New York. You know what I mean? Like, there's just not, New York, has an infrastructure for big business to begin with. And to replicate that somewhere else, you may be able to get like a little microcosm of that somewhere else for sure. You may get a Miami that does that. Or you may get a Dallas that does that, or a Fort Worth or anything like that. But I just don't see anybody replicating New York at the end of the day. So I'd say a steady growth. New York's not going nowhere. New York will be there. Brooklyn's not going nowhere. If anything, you're going to see growth in the other boroughs outside of it, right? So if I had to rank the boroughs, this isn't a personal ranking, New York people, don't take offense to this, all right? But I would just say based on like development, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island is how it kind of works, right? So Staten Island has more single family homes, right, and more a little bit, I would say, maybe family oriented part of New York City. So you're going to see growth there. People also don't take into account the amount of cultures that live in New York City and the amount of turnover of neighborhoods that happen. Like, we see this regularly, right? I was watching something the other day where it's like, people were talking about the Super Bowl and the halftime show and all this stuff. And I'm like, to me, like, that didn't bother me in any way. Like, what am I going to say? I have friends that are from every single walk of life you could possibly think of. And it's been through generations like that, right? So the next generation of Chinese Americans that moved to New York City, they're moving to Staten Island right now. So the people in Staten Island will sell, right? And there's a huge like Georgian influx into southern Brooklyn right now, right? So the Georgians will move in, and maybe the Russians move out. Like, that's what New York City is. So that's what the boroughs are. Let's say Manhattan, not so much of that like cultural diversity, right? But Queens is the most culturally diverse place in the United States. That is not like an overstatement. You could I've got the amount of languages. There's every language in the world is spoken in Queens, right? And every neighborhood, you could go one block over and they're speaking Japanese. The next neighbor over, they're speaking Spanish, but it's a different dialect of Spanish that you're normally used to, right? Like, that's what it is. So I see the boroughs like Queens burgeoning. Queens is going to go nuts. I guarantee you Queens goes crazy. I think a lot of southern and central Brooklyn will continue to grow, right? So from, let's say, East New York, Canarsie, Bay Ridge, right? I lived in Bay Ridge for years. Bay Ridge was a place that was the last stop on the R train, right? I love living there. It's got a ton of restaurants, got parks everywhere, very culturally diverse area as well. Bay Ridge is going to blow up. And Bay Ridge is expensive now. Like, Bay Ridge is expensive right now. It's still millions of dollars to live there, but it's going to grow even more. Neighborhoods like Bensonhurst and Dyker Heights, they're on the D and the N line. Follow the trains in New York, and you'll follow the money in New York. But I also think there will be plenty of people who want to come home and pull into their driveway, right? So a neighborhood like I grew up in Marine Park, there's no alternate side parking there. You can park on the street, no issues. Bergen Beach, Mill Basin, Ditmas Park, Flatbush, these are all areas that have so much more growth to give, and I see that continuing as time goes on. Same thing in the Bronx. Like, the Bronx is such an underdeveloped place. It really is. It's always kind of been the last place that people looked was the Bronx. But I do see the Bronx also changing. Like, if you drive to a Yankee game right now, and you went 5 years ago compared to now, and you're driving on the Major Deegan, right? It used to be just like nothing. And now there's buildings, new condos everywhere just on the side of the Major Deegan. So New York City just keep going.
Absolutely. Now, where can people find you?
You can find me at Lou Bell 23 on Instagram. I go on a lot of rants. Erin can tell you.
They're great.
They're pretty good. You can find me at Revive Residential. You could Google me, Lou Belisario, anytime. And that's it.
Perfect.
Anywhere.
Thank you so much. You
Thank
are
you.
truly an expert of your craft and of Brooklyn overall. I've learned so much. And come back anytime.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening to Built Different with Erin Sykes. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please be sure to rate, follow, and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. For more insights and updates, follow along on Instagram and share this episode with someone who's building their own version of success. Until next time, keep building a life of value because we're all built a little different. I record Built Different at Pod Plus Studios in Jupiter, Florida. To reach my real estate team, visit sykesproperties.com, and to reach me directly, email Erin@sykesproperties.com.